Environment in the Indus Valley Civilization. What kind of story does the failure of the water supply in Mohenjo-Daro tell us about the way nature has impacted human society and the way human societies have impacted nature in history? What positive effects did river engineering have for the residents of Mohenjo-Daro? What were the negative impacts of river engineering? Life in Mohenjo-Daro was semi-amphibious, according to Michael Jansen, an excavator at India's Mohenjo-Daro archaeological dig. 4 to 5 months out of the year, the plain of Sindh was a vast sheet of water. The cities were linked by river. Jansen's observation reveals to us just the tip of the iceberg. Mohenjo-Daro was an island in a vast floodplain. However, once we look again at the archaeological remains, we recognize that it was designed to be such. The city was built on an artificially constructed mound 60 feet high, and that mound contained separate sewer and freshwater pipes large enough for a human to stand within. These people developed skills that enabled them to engineer their environments. In both Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, the most surprising and important find was that throughout the Indus Valley, a civilization of perhaps 5 million people covering more than 1.2 million square miles, the bricks, street widths, weights, and measures were all standardized. The Indus Valley people built their cities with straight streets and grid patterns with corners at right angles. In many neighborhoods, there were communal restrooms that drained into discrete sewer systems and shared freshwater wells in squares at the end of each residential street. Wealthier homes had 2 stories and their own kitchens and bathrooms. This was nearly unheard of in the ancient world. The story of China's journey toward unity, for example, in the period from 550 to 221 BCE, reflects a degree of standardization of this kind, but this took place nearly 2,000 years after the Indus Valley civilization practiced it. Rome never achieved such standardization. Documentary and archaeological evidence shows that Indus Valley traders hawked their wares as far west as Samaria and Egypt. They had agents who lived in those cities as trade representatives. Indus Valley ports, especially the one at Lothal, were carefully engineered and built to withstand earthquakes and floods. This civilization was well administered, organized, and technologically advanced. Historians have often recounted these achievements as indication of the genius displayed by humans and the effectiveness of human organization. Who could blame them for celebrating such achievements? The Indus Valley was truly a marvel. But this same evidence also forces us to recognize that humans were manipulating nature from our earliest days on the planet, and that such manipulation carries a cost. By manipulating the environment, we change its basic parts, and it can break down and become less fertile and less productive than it was in the natural state. Historians now recognize that all human achievements have occurred within and in relation to the natural environment. By around 1500 BC, the Indus Valley civilization was only a shadow of its former glory. The cities Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa showed a steady population decline. The fields show evidence of having lost their fertility. People were moving out of the Indus Valley, but historians are not completely sure why. The first guess of historians and archaeologists at the time the Indus Valley civilization was rediscovered in 1922 and 1923 was that an invasion of warlike people from the north and east had come through the Hindu Kush and attacked and destroyed the cities and their inhabitants. Naturally, archaeologists look for evidence to confirm this hypothesis, but these cities were relatively intact and there was no evidence of looting, burning, or other destruction typical of human fighting. Grave sites showed very little evidence of bodily damage due to weapons. More common was evidence consistent with sicknesses that resulted from malnutrition, bones softened by lack of calcium or twisted due to lack of vitamin C or other nutrients, for example. So archaeologists are convinced that the Indus Valley civilization did not disappear due to war. More likely, it disappeared because of natural and human-made changes that meant the kind of intensive farming necessary to support a society of 5 million was no longer possible. The Indus Valley Civilization, unable to adjust to a more irrigation-intensive system, gradually disappeared as their soil became unusable and the water dried up. Intensive use, combined with natural changes and a lack of resiliency, appears to have been the cause of the fall of one of the most advanced early human civilizations. First, and in a similar fashion to the events that occurred later in Mesopotamia, the soil in Indus fields gradually became salinized. This was in part due to nature. The seasonal floods of the Indus River and its tributaries were produced by monsoon rains in the Himalayan mountains to the north and east. Research shows that the river was dry for about half the year and flooded for about half the year. As the flooded river slowed down and spread out across the valley, it dropped its silt onto the fields, including salts that made them increasingly less likely to support agriculture. Part of this story also has to do with intensive agricultural use. Much of the land had originally been covered with trees. To employ the land for agriculture, large swaths of it were cleared and planted seasonally. As in Mesopotamia, during the flood season, the fields were left fallow to collect the rich silt from the river. As humans built their cities and cleared forests, the floods covered larger areas. Flooding and human attempts to control river courses are important issues in most of the early civilizations that we study as historians. These are modern issues as well. The United States has made changes to the course of the Mississippi River during its history. This has not worked out much better than the engineering engaged in by the Indus Valley Civilization or the Mesopotamians. The more humans engineer the water flow of the river, the worse the Mississippi floods become. As the United States began using the Mississippi for transportation and irrigation in the 19th century, it was dredged to make it deeper and straightened to allow for more agricultural use and settlement along the banks of the river. As a result, the river now carries a higher volume of water over a shorter and straighter course. This has made floods in the late 20th and early 21st centuries worse than ever before. Along with this, the increased settlement and use of the land on the banks of the river has meant greater economic damage when the river does flood. In a different way, but no less devastating for the society, Oahu's Waiole Ditch has been used for a century to divert 27 million gallons of water per day from the natural watershed in the Ko'olau Mountains to the west side of Oahu. This was originally intended to support the growth of sugar plantations. This diversion has changed the ecological balance of Oahu in important ways. In some ways, we're repeating the disasters that the Indus people experienced 5,000 years ago. So, flooding and the attempt to control nature have consequences, and this is a common theme in history. Thanks for watching this presentation.